A to Z Mysteries, Book Number 24, The X'd Out X-Ray, by Ron Roy. Chapter 9. The kids held the X-ray up to Dink's window and examined the weird shape from all angles. Ruth Rose chased around the shape with her finger. "It looks kind of familiar. Oh my gosh," she yelled. "Dink, go get the morning newspaper." Dink raced out of the bedroom and was back half a minute later with the paper. Ruth Rose found the picture of Penelope Gwynn and the drawing of the stolen pendant. "If I'm right..." Ruth Rose held the drawing of the pendant to the glass of Dink's window. Then she placed the X-ray on top of the newspaper page. The funny shape they had been trying to identify fit over the pendant. The drawing was a little bigger than the shape on the X-ray, but they were the same. "The blurry shape is a penguin," Ruth Rose shouted. "It's exactly like Penelope Gwynn's." "I don't get it," Dink said. "How could Penelope's pendant be on this X-ray?" Josh looked at him. "You tell us," he said. "It's your arm in the X-ray." "Dink, what happened in the first aid tent?" Ruth Rose asked. "What did the doctor do?" Dink thought back to yesterday morning. "He wrapped my arm, then he took me to the... No, wait a minute. While he was putting the bandage on my arm, he made me read a sign taped to the tent wall," he said. Dink looked at Josh and Ruth Rose. "He said he wanted me to read to make sure I didn't have a concussion," Dink went on. "But I think that doctor stole the pendant. He hid it inside the bandage and made me read so I wouldn't see him do it." "But why would he put it inside your bandage?" Josh asked. "I know," Ruth Rose said. "He knew the cops might be searching people, so he hid it on you. He let you sneak the pendant out of the park for him." Dink nodded, feeling his heart racing. Then, when he got me to the X-ray office, he unwrapped the bandage and took the pendant out. "But didn't you see him do that?" Josh asked. Dink shook his head. "I was so dumb," he said. "He had me read another sign while he was taking the bandage off. I wasn't looking at my arm." "So the thief wasn't the hot dog guy," Josh said. "Or that woman, or Big Hans. It was your doctor." "How do we find him?" Ruth Rose asked. "His name is Dr. Fleming," Dink said, remembering the name tag. "Georgie Fleming," Josh said, looking at the autograph book. "Let's call Hartford Hospital," Ruth Rose suggested. "How many Dr. George Flemings could there possibly be?" They ran to the telephone in the hallway. Ruth Rose got the number for the hospital and dialed. There was no Dr. George Fleming on their staff. No Georgette or Georgina or Georgia either. No G. Flemings at all. But there was a Dr. Richard Fleming. "May I speak to him?" Ruth Rose asked. A minute later, she was talking to Dr. Richard Fleming. She asked him 2 questions. Was he working in the first aid tent in Bushnell Park yesterday? Did he know anyone named Georgie Fleming? Ruth Rose hung up. "He was home with a cold yesterday," she said, "and he's never heard of Georgie Fleming." "Great," said Dink. "So how do we find the Dr. Fleming who was in the tent yesterday?" "Dr. Richard Fleming told me something else," Ruth Rose said with a little grin on her face. "Someone stole his white jacket yesterday, right out of his office." Dink and Josh just stared at her. "With his name tag on it," Ruth Rose added. So if the guy in the tent wasn't Dr. Fleming, who was he?" Dink asked. "He was Georgie, the thief," Josh said. "But he knew doctor stuff," Dink said. "He took me to the hospital and x-rayed my arm." "Maybe he is a doctor, just not Dr. Fleming," Ruth Rose suggested. "Then why would he need to steal some other doctor's jacket and name tag?" Dink asked. "If he knew he was gonna snatch that diamond," Josh said, "he wouldn't wear his own name." Dink nodded. "That makes sense. But who is he? Where does he live? Georgie knows his way around Hartford Hospital, Josh said. So maybe he lives in Hartford. He pointed at the autograph book. And if he lives in Hartford, maybe his Aunt Alva Horst does too. Josh picked up the telephone and dialed information. He was given a phone number for A. Horst, and he dialed it. When a woman answered, Josh asked if he was speaking to Alva Horst. When she said yes, he told her that he had found an autograph book belonging to Georgie with her name in it. Could you give me his name and address so I can send it to him? Josh asked. Georgie's aunt supplied his name and address, and Josh hung up. His name is George Schill, he told Dink and Ruth Rose. He lives on Laurel Street in Hartford. Chapter 10. We can't just show up at the guy's house, Josh said. He'd just deny the whole thing. But we have this X-ray for proof, Dink said. And that autograph book. Get real, Dink. We're kids and he's a grown-up, Josh said. He'll just tell us to get lost. I know one person he won't tell to get lost, Ruth Rose said, as she reached for the telephone. 20 minutes later, Officer Fallon was sitting in Dink's living room. The kids told him the whole story. I'm glad you called me, Officer Fallon said. George Schill might still have the pendant. He hasn't had much time to get rid of it. He placed a call to the Hartford Chief of Police. They agreed to meet near Georgie's house in 45 minutes. Dink, you should come along to identify this guy, Officer Fallon said. Are your folks home? They went out, Dink said. But I could leave them a note telling I'm with you. Dink looked at Josh and Ruth Rose. Could they come too? They solved the mystery, he said. Officer Fallon grinned. Sure, well, I'll go, he said. I wouldn't want to break up the gang. 2 Hartford police cruisers were waiting when Officer Fallon pulled up to the corner of Laurel Street. The kids waited in the back seat as Officer Fallon talked with the Hartford officers. You ready, Dink? Officer Fallon asked when he came back to his cruiser. Dink nodded. His stomach was flipping like a fish on a line. Let's go, Officer Fallon said. The other guys will be around back in case Georgie decides to leave that way. Officer Fallon drove slowly up Laurel Street and stopped at number 13. The house was old and made of brick. One shutter was hanging crooked, and the lawn needed mowing. All the shades were pulled down. Officer Fallon and Dink walked up to the door. Dink was holding the envelope with the X-ray inside. His legs felt like cooked spaghetti. The man who answered the door was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He was barefooted and eating a donut, but Dink recognized him. It was the doctor who had been in the first aid tent the day before. It's him, Dink whispered. Mr. Schill, is it? Officer Fallon said. George Schill swallowed nervously. What? Who? Officer Fallon held out the autograph book. Did you lose this? Georgie looked at the book. I think so. Where did you find it? Penelope Gwynn had it, Officer Fallon said. She was signing it for you when you grabbed her diamond pendant yesterday. Then you hid the jewel in this boy's bandage so you could sneak it past the cops in Bushnell Park. You removed it at the hospital when you took X-rays. George Schill nearly dropped his donut. His mouth opened and shut, but no words came out. Nothing to say, Mr. Schill? Or should I call you Dr. Fleming? Officer Fallon said. Maybe this will help you find your tongue. Officer Fallon nodded to Dink, who held up the X-ray. Mr. Schill, if I searched your house, would I find Miss Gwynn's pendant? Officer Fallon asked. Would I find the jacket you stole from Dr. Fleming's office? Georgie found his voice. I can explain everything, he stammered. Yes, I'm sure you can, but let's save it till we get to the station. Officer Fallon said, pulling out his handcuffs. Officer Fallon handed Georgie over to the Hartford cops. Then, with the pendant safe in his shirt pocket, he drove the kids to the Parkview Hotel. Officer Fallon parked, then pulled the diamond penguin and its chain from his pocket. He passed it over to the back seat. I called ahead, and she'll be waiting in the lobby. Dink took the pendant and the kids walked into the lobby. Penelope Gwynn and her manager were sitting together. Here, you should give it to her, Dink said, handing the pendant to Ruth Rose. You found Georgie's name in the autograph book. Ruth Rose took the pendant, then she gave it to Josh. You figured out how to find him, she said. Go ahead, Penelope is waiting. Penelope, Gwynn, and Hans stood up and smiled. Josh gulped and handed the diamond penguin to Penelope. Thank you so much, she said. How did you ever find it? We found a name inside the autograph book, Ruth Rose explained. They told the whole story, and Dink showed her the x-ray. Officer Fallon was on his telephone. He hung up and stepped forward. Georgie Schill got tossed out of medical school for cheating on exams, he said. And that wasn't the first time he'd been in trouble. Anyway, he read about your concert, Miss Gwynn, and he decided to be there. He used the autograph book to get close enough to steal your pendant. Penelope handed the pendant to Hans, who fastened it around her neck. Georgie went to the first aid tent and told the medical student on duty that he was needed back at the hospital. Officer Fallon went on. Of course, Georgie was wearing Dr. Fleming's stolen jacket and name tag, so the other guy believed him. After that, Georgie just waited for your intermission. Penelope smiled. That pendant means a lot to me, she said. Hans gave it to me when we were married. Josh gaped at the big, fierce-looking manager. He's your husband? Josh asked. We saw him go into a jewelry shop. He looked all sneaky, so we thought he might have been the thief. Penelope poked her husband. Why were you sneaking into a jewelry store? She asked. Hans grinned. I was trying to buy you a new penguin pendant, he said. Penelope gave him a kiss. Then she kissed Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose.